The prestigious Thornfield Concert Hall buzzed with anticipation on the night of its annual gala. The air was thick with the promise of music, philanthropy, and prestige. Gleaming chandeliers bathed the red velvet seats in warm golden light, while the stage itself shimmered, polished to perfection, for the city's wealthiest patrons, who would soon arrive in tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns. On that stage, bent over a brass fixture and carefully polishing until it shone like liquid gold, stood Marcus Chen. At 38, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity, though his olive-green custodial uniform marked him as someone most of the evening's guests would never notice. To them, he was invisible, part of the background, a necessary function rather than a person with a story. For Marcus, though, this job meant stability. It gave him enough to keep a roof over his daughter Emma's head, pay for her needs, and, most importantly, ensure he was home every evening to tuck her into bed. He had been at Thornfield for 2 years now. In that time, he had learned to fade into the fabric of the place, moving unseen among its wealthy patrons, artists, and board members. But tonight, something about the grandeur of the gala unsettled him. The stage was dominated by a magnificent Steinway concert grand piano. Its polished black surface caught the stage lights like a mirror, and Marcus's reflection stared back at him, tired yet wistful. His chest tightened with an ache he had long learned to silence. Once, long ago, he had imagined himself seated at such a piano under the glow of stage lights. Once, his name had been spoken with promise by teachers and mentors who believed he had a future in music. But that was another life, buried beneath years of loss and sacrifice. "Almost finished there, Marcus." The commanding voice belonged to James Wellington, a man Marcus could never ignore. Wellington was the chairman of the Thornfield Foundation, a titan of industry, and a man whose presence filled any room. His tuxedo was flawlessly tailored, his gold watch gleaming as though time itself bowed to him. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied softly, stepping back from the piano. "Everything should be ready for tonight's performance." Wellington gave a satisfied nod before glancing toward the grand entrance where patrons had begun filtering in. Wealthy donors, business leaders, and society figures, their laughter echoing lightly through the hall. Then, with a spark of amusement in his eyes, Wellington turned back to Marcus. "Tell me," he said, gesturing toward the piano, "do you play at all? I've often wondered if any of our staff might be hiding musical talents." Marcus hesitated, heat rising in his cheeks. "A little, sir, nothing professional." "Oh?" Wellington's eyebrows lifted. "What sort of things can you play?" Before Marcus could respond, Wellington pivoted smoothly toward the arriving crowd. Raising his voice so that it carried to every corner of the acoustically perfect hall, he called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we may have a surprise treat for you. Our custodial staff member Marcus here tells me he can play the piano. What do you say we have a little entertainment before the real show begins?" A ripple of laughter spread through the gathering guests. Faces turned toward Marcus, many of them already amused at the thought. Phones were raised, eager to capture what they assumed would be a novelty, an underqualified janitor fumbling over classical music. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was no invitation. It was spectacle. He was being paraded for their entertainment, reduced to little more than a curiosity. He opened his mouth to decline, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the smug glimmer in Wellington's eyes, or the sea of condescending faces staring at him. Or perhaps it was the thought of Emma, his daughter, who believed her father could do anything. "What would you like me to play?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The crowd stirred, surprised. Wellington grinned and gestured grandly toward the piano. "Surprise us, Marcus. Play whatever you think will impress this distinguished crowd." Marcus walked to the bench slowly, the cloth he had been polishing with still clutched in his hand. He set it down carefully, then lowered himself onto the seat. Adjusting the bench height with practiced precision, he let his fingers hover above the keys. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember, not the janitor, not the widower, not the man scraping by to raise his child alone, but the pianist he had once been. He began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2, floated into the air, delicate yet commanding. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What had been a room brimming with laughter and light-hearted mockery grew silent, reverent. Marcus's fingers moved with elegance and certainty, shaped by countless hours of practice from a life most here could never imagine. Every note carried not just technical mastery, but emotion, grief, resilience, love. The music poured out of him like confession and prayer. For Marcus, it was as though years of silence had been broken, and he was speaking again in the only language that had ever truly been his own. The audience sat frozen, condescending smiles melting into expressions of awe and disbelief. By the time the final notes lingered and faded, the hall was steeped in silence. Then, slowly, Wellington began to clap, hesitant at first, then fervent. The applause swelled into a standing ovation, thunderous and sincere. Marcus rose, breathless, humbled, and yet alive in a way he had not felt for years. For the first time since tragedy had derailed his path, he was being seen not as invisible, not as a custodian, but as the man he truly was. Wellington approached him, eyes shining with something Marcus had never seen before. Respect. That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that? I graduated from the New England Conservatory, Marcus admitted quietly. I was building a career as a pianist when my wife passed away in a car accident. I became a single father. I needed stability. So I put my dreams aside to take care of my daughter. A murmur swept through the crowd, understanding, sympathy, perhaps even shame at how quickly they had dismissed him. Wellington hesitated, then asked, "Marcus, would you play another piece?" This time, Marcus chose Bach's Air on the G-string, Emma's favorite lullaby when she was small. As the gentle melody filled the hall, it carried with it the memory of bedtime stories, whispered reassurances, and the quiet devotion of a father who had sacrificed everything. The audience listened with tears in their eyes, many of them silently transported to moments with their own families. When the last note faded, Wellington stepped forward, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we came here to celebrate the arts. And in doing so, we have discovered an artist among us, a man who has given more than most of us can imagine. Marcus, I would like to make you an offer. The Thornfield Foundation will establish a fund to support you. You will have the opportunity to return to music while providing security for your daughter. No parent should have to choose between their art and their family." Marcus's vision blurred with tears. For so long he had carried the weight of sacrifice in silence. Now, here was a lifeline, not just for him, but for Emma. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood on that very same stage, no longer in an olive green uniform but in concert attire. He performed with the City Symphony and gave solo recitals, his daughter Emma always in the front row clapping proudly. To her, he was the best pianist in the world, not because he filled concert halls, but because he had once given up everything to take care of her, and then found the courage to reclaim his dreams without ever letting her go. And in Wellington's office, a photograph from that first night remained on display. Marcus at the piano in his janitor's uniform, head bowed over the keys, reminding everyone who saw it that sometimes the greatest talents are hidden in plain sight, waiting only for someone to look past the surface.